Now let's talk about laughter. So laughter is a universal phenomenon, but definitely not a uniform one. It comes in many different forms, from a slight chuckle to rolling on the floor while crying in laughter. There are also different ways of smiling, and no, smiling is not laughing. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a first one to laugh loses competition, and I smile, and people are like, "Oh, you laughed," and like, a smile is not a laugh. Smiling is visual, and laughter is primarily auditory. And we all have a range of laughter. We all have our signature laugh, our own unique style of laughing, but also a whole spectrum. Like, if I don't find something funny enough to actually genuinely laugh, but I still want to acknowledge the person's earnest attempt at making me laugh and acknowledge that I appreciate their attempt at humor, kind of takes this form. Something like that, just like a quick expelling of air through the nostrils, which turns into kind of a head nod a little bit. That's my way of politely acknowledging that something was funny, just not funny enough for me to laugh. And some people have very obvious fake laughs, such as the machine gun laugh that's like, and laughing and crying are not always easy to distinguish. They both involve that involuntary staggered drawing of breath, like for both when you're laughing and you're crying, you need to catch your breath. So that laughter can easily be mistaken for grief, as both states may involve copious flooding of tears. Like, you could laugh so hard that you're crying tears of laughter, and that can make it even more difficult to distinguish between whether I'm happy and laughing or sad and crying. Which is weird because they're polar opposite emotions, and yet the signifier is essentially formally the same. So that laughter can take many different forms. Snickering and chortling and giggling and cackling. They're all different physical modes that employ different degrees of volume and tone and pitch and pace and force and rhythm. And laughter, as I mentioned with crying, can convey a range of possible emotional attitudes. There's joyous laughing, there's sarcastic laughing, there's sly laughing, there's dismissive laughing, there's nervous laughter, there's relieved laughter, there's derogatory laughter, there's embarrassed laughter, there's hysterical laughter, there's sympathetic laughter, there's evil laughter. So that laughter is a signifier with many possible signifieds. Even though the laughter itself is a signifier, just sound without any sense, it is socially coded through and through, so that different signified meanings can be attached to the signifier of laughter, depending on the context. So that even though laughter is a spontaneous physical occurrence, it's one which is socially specific and context dependent. So in terms of denotation, connotation, oftentimes the denotation of a laugh is I'm laughing. But the connotation of laughter is much more informationally rich and culturally loaded, in that you can discern the emotional state signified by that laughter and the cause and the reason for that laughter. So there's a whole semiotics of laughing, and each type of laugh, each genre of laughter is like a symbol in this complex signifying system. You can therefore treat laughter as a text or as a language, and with any language, it has regional accents, which can be distinguished along the lines of culture or gender or economic class. So an upper class British person may have a different laugh than even a fellow British person if they're from a lower economic class. Each subject position kind of has its own range of acceptable forms of laughter. And it's possible to exceed this allowable range with social consequences. So a military general, for example, is allowed to laugh heartily, but if they were to giggle like a Japanese schoolgirl, then that signifier wouldn't really mesh with the rest of that subject position of the military, of the stern, autocratic military general. Or Santa Claus is renowned for bellowing out a jolly ho ho ho. But imagine if Santa instead went he 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 in a snickering fashion. Santa would no longer be that jolly fellow. He would be instantly a lot creepier, someone who you don't want crawling down your chimney at night. So, being a bodily phenomenon that's socially coded, laughter is always caught between nature and culture, and also between our bodies and our minds. So, laughter runs along the middle of many binaries and between the opposite poles of binaries. So, the binary of nature, culture, laughter is between them. And the binary of mind and body, laughter kind of emerges between the relation, out of the relation between the two. And because laughter doesn't fully belong to the mind or the body, it kind of exists somewhere in between them and is never entirely at home in one or the other. Like they belong to the body and they originate from the body, but they don't possess sense until they enter into a cultural context and are interpreted by the mind. Like the mind interprets the reason why you're laughing currently and it attributes a certain cause to that laughter, a certain socially derived cause. But since it's not fully located in the mind, then something always eludes the mind and eludes meaning. Like we try our best to fully capture and encapsulate our bodily experiences so that they're firmly placed in a discourse wherein everything is narrativized and rationally makes sense. But we can never fully tame and civilize these bodily experiences that don't inherently belong to the realm of meaning and culture and social construction. So that despite the interpretation of the laughter being situated in discourse and culture and signification, laughter can often become so convulsive and uproarious that it eludes and transcends sense making, allowing the body to momentarily flip that binary and take precedence over the mind in those moments. So using Freud's ego terms, the unconscious takes the reins. The id pitches the ego into temporary disarray as we indulge in riotous laughter, as we indulge in the disintegration of sense, and we just lose ourselves in the moment. We can laugh so hard that we even lose self-control, physical self-control, and the body just momentarily gets out of hand. And like I said earlier, we regress in those moments to that uncoordinated state of the infant just rolling on the ground laughing. And we kind of revert back to our animal selves, just like a dog barks and a cat meows and a cow moos. Our animal sound is laughter. It's such a primal expression of primal bodily feelings. So that laughter signifies, but it also involves the breakdown of signification and the disruption of coherent meaning. As the symbolic realm, all the things that uphold discourse, temporary collapses, and we just indulge in absurdity and nonsense and surrealism and goonery, temporarily undermining that sphere of orderly and articulate meaning while still depending on it as a frame of reference for whatever is considered funny in those moments. And again, because this has potential to transgress the powers that be and undermine and overturn the state of affairs that they've arranged, laughter is, just like jokes and humor, demonized and trivialized, just like the practice of gossip discussed last week. Isn't it weird that all the everyday practices that potentially threaten the established order are demonized and infantilized and trivialized in discourse, while practices that don't challenge the established order are normalized? It's almost as if there are power relations involved in discourse. So laughter is often conflated with humor. They're often seen as the same, but the two aren't necessarily mutually inclusive. You can have laughter without humor, such as being physically tickled into laughing despite not experiencing anything funny, or just feeling euphorically happy where you find yourself laughing for no reason. Let's say you're getting some sort of dental surgery and they put that laughing gas on you, the nitrous oxide, that would elicit laughter without any necessary funny stimulus. And then vice versa, you can have humor without laughter. Like you can see a witty pun that you recognize as funny, that you acknowledge is funny, without laughing. So laughter can be defined as a set of bodily states that culminates in specific vocal patterns, whereas humor can be defined as an amusing cognitive activity that occurs in response to certain stimuli. They can and often do occur in conjunction with each other, but you can't have one without the other. Laughter doesn't necessarily need to express one's perception that something is humorous. And listen to those definitions again. Laughter is a set of bodily states that culminates in specific vocal patterns, whereas humor is an amusing cognitive activity that occurs in response to certain social stimuli or stimuli with the outside world. So one seems to originate in the body and the other one in the mind, so that there's no necessary connection between humor and laughter. So philosophers and theorists who write on laughter and humor have proposed two contrasting and competing accounts to explain the relationship between the two. The cognitivist account posits that first we perceive and recognize something as humorous in our minds, and then our body registers it by laughing. So that, according to this account, humor comes first and laughter follows second. And then in the somatic account, first we internally experience the bodily state of laughter, and then our mind attempts to make sense of the bodily sensation by rationally attributing it to experiencing something humorous. So in this case, laughter comes first and then humor follows second as a way to explain and rationalize the source of the laughter. So the somatic account would help to explain cases of the giggles where we find ourselves laughing, potentially contagious laughter, without any reason. We find ourselves laughing without knowing why. Or nervous laughter, again, where you find yourself laughing for no discernible reason, and it's not necessarily for positive purposes. In those cases, it's just purely the laughter with no humor. But as we discussed in the week on the mind and the body, since the Enlightenment, there has been a cognitive bias in all Western thinking and Western philosophy, and that extends to discussions on humor, so that the cognitivist account typically takes precedence and is more commonly and widely accepted as the account that explains where laughter and humor come from respectively and how they interact with each other. So that Enlightenment construction of the superiority of the mind over the body in that mind-body dualism has continued into this discussion, where people typically give credit to the mind first and foremost as the originator of the humorous experience instead of the final register of that experience. I, for one, am inclined to side more with the somatic account of laughter, because it wouldn't make sense for humor to originate in the mind and then bear its effects on the body only after the fact. It's more likely the other way around, because you can't consciously choose to increase your heart rate or tighten your cheek muscles or constrict your vocal cords or make your face go red with laughter or raise your endorphin levels. Those are purely physiological phenomena, and it's more likely that they happen first and then the mind explains those sensations by attributing it to a humorous source, rather than merely thinking something is funny and then somehow consciously using the power of your brain to cause all these bodily symptoms to emerge. And the somatic account of laughter is given credence by the masters of laughter, babies. Because babies laugh at things well before they develop the cognitive capacity to recognize consciously why something is funny. For example,
Hey, Buzz, you ready?
so babies, as they are wont to do, tend to laugh at things like funny sounds or games of peekaboo, stuff like that, even though they don't possess the cognitive abilities to appraise those things as being incongruous or superior or relief. So in this video, what's the baby laughing at? They have no mental construct or concept of dandelions. They have no mental image of what dandelions should look like. So therefore, there's no incongruity that's occurring here when the father blows the leaves off the dandelion. All the baby sees is, some sort of thing put in front of their face, and then it quickly disappears, and that makes the baby laugh. It's not like the baby is logically thinking, "Oh, how funny, father. What a clever jape you pulled. The dandelion's leaves were there, and now they're no longer there. How incongruous. Very amusing, father." I highly doubt there was that line of logic going through the baby's head. There's probably something a lot more bodily and primal causing the baby to laugh. And babies are much more open to this general feeling of of a mirthful laughter, because they're more in touch with their bodies by virtue of not being as in touch with their minds yet. They haven't been indoctrinated by society and taught the discursive constructions of meaning and the whole mind-body dualism and how we're supposed to treat the mind with priority over the body. Like that, the baby didn't get that memo yet. They haven't reached the point where they can detach the mind from their body the way we do to rationally suppress our urges. For them, the id is still in control over the ego hasn't even developed yet to control the id. So the id just flows freely and unrestrained, and it leads to this laughter for no apparent logical reason. So that they're more open to showing amusement in this way than we are, because we're more self-restrained and overly rational. So that we need the baby in this situation for us to laugh. If the baby were removed from this equation and it was just this gentleman alone in a field suggestively blowing on a dandelion, we probably wouldn't find it as amusing, because we are constrained by by our ego and its imposition on rationality, which the baby is currently free of for now until they grow up and get a little bit older and learn the ways of society. So laughter isn't always a laughing matter. Laughter is no joke sometimes. Since being out of control is never entirely gratifying, laughter can potentially border on feeling unpleasant at times when it's relentless. Like, have you ever had someone making you laugh so hard that you're literally physically begging them to stop? Like, please stop, I can't take it anymore. And there are cases throughout history of people dying of laughter. They could suffer a stroke or a heart attack or an aneurysm, giving new meaning to the phrase dangerously funny. Zeuxis, a 5th century BC Greek painter, is said to have died laughing after he painted an old woman in the style of the goddess Aphrodite, and he was laughing so hard at the difference between the old woman and how the goddess Aphrodite should look. There was a lot of apparently incongruity there, and that's what got him. Harry Eagleton, the author of the reading on laughter, notes that another death in the novelist Anthony Trollope, who suffered a stroke while laughing at a comic novel. And Eagleton notes, a misfortune by which few of his own readers are likely to be afflicted, which is a burn if I've ever heard one. He's saying that this novelist died from laughter reading someone else's work, and that none of his own readers are ever going to be in danger of dying of laughter. And then there are literally cases of laughter epidemics. Most recently, or most notably, the Tanganyika laughter epidemic of 1962. It was an outbreak of mass hysteria that occurred in the village of Kashasha in Tanganyika, which is now called Tanzania. The laughter epidemic began with just 3 schoolgirls at a boarding school and spread throughout the school, affecting about 100 out of the 160 pupils, all aged 12 to 18. There were no teachers or staff affected, and symptoms lasted for up to 16 days. Imagine laughing for 16 days straight. Like, even laughing for 30 seconds straight can put a lot of stress on the cardiovascular and can kind of give the abs a good workout. So imagine how exhausting and potentially damaging it could be to laugh for days at a time, upwards of weeks at a time. So the whole school was thrown into chaos. Students were, as expected, unable to concentrate on their lessons, and the school had to close down temporarily. And then the epidemic spread to 14 other nearby schools and villages, affecting about 1,000 more young people and lasting 18 months in total. The cause was suspected to be stress induced, as Tanzania had just become an independent country and students were facing higher expectations and pressure from teachers and parents and elders. So it's more of a nervous, hysterical laughter. Tanganyikan society was ruled by strict traditional elders, so the likelihood is the hysteria was a manifestation of the cultural dissonance between the traditional conservatism at home and espoused by these elders and parents and teachers and the new ideas that were challenging those beliefs in school, which caused these adverse reactions in these young students. And there have been cases of mass hysteria throughout history. In the Middle Ages, there were many examples of something called dancing mania, where the peasants who were just, it's always the peasant class too, they were just so stressed out from their lives as peasants in medieval times that they all just started dancing and gyrating, and it was contagious. It spread like wildfire. And mass hysteria usually occurs in people who don't have a lot of power. It's often a last resort for people of a low status. If they're unable to express that something is wrong with their social structure and social roles consciously and outwardly, then it could come out in very unexpected ways, such as collective and contagious dancing plagues or laughter epidemics.